Okay, hello, folks, and welcome to another one of these live streams, really around artificial organizations. My name's Barry O'Reilly, and today we're going to be talking about the metrics for AI transformation. This is probably one of the things I get asked about probably the most, about when people are doing these massive transformation initiatives or they're trying to come up with new ways of working or launch these products, is how do they know that they're actually working on the right things? It's one of the questions that not enough people ask, in my opinion, and it's what we'll be sharing today as we sort of dive into this little story, really, of how I've been helping both startups in my venture studio at Nobody Studios, and then numbers of companies all over the world, from Fortune 500s to scaling businesses. So it's always fun to sort of do these events. Make sure you put questions in both in the live stream, but afterwards, and I always do my best to try and get back and answer as many as we possibly can, so we can have some fun along the way. Because this is the whole point of doing them live and getting the greater engagement. So probably one of the biggest sort of questions that comes up is many people tell me that they're doing transformations, specifically AI transformations at the moment. But the question I ask is, how will you know when you're done? And that falls sort of flat for most people because they don't know how to answer it. They're thinking about tools that they've deployed, that 5,000 people are using ChatGPT. It's all sort of activity based and very little focused around outcome. And really, what's important when you're trying to do this work is you have to start thinking about what is truly changing. And that's capabilities you're developing, the mindsets of your team, their behavior. Is your business model innovating? And ultimately, are you seeing a culture transformation? You've got to move beyond the sort of counting things of tools or pilots or really vanity metrics, as we call them. So today, what I'm going to show you is the system that I use to help senior executives, startup leaders go through this. And it's really thinking about it at three simple levels. The personal level, you as a person, how are you actually transforming the way you work? The team, or the atomic unit of change that actually really delivers outcomes. And then ultimately your organization, and thinking about the way that they work and how they do it. So this is sort of the problem at the moment, right? AI is everywhere. I can't think about, it's never been a better time to be in AI. Even in the startup world, 71% of funding in the last quarter has only gone to AI-based companies. So there's all this activity everywhere, but we're seeing very little impact. MIT put out a report where they interviewed over 350 leaders to understand what was actually returning from these Gen AI initiatives. And 95% of them are returning nothing. So it's kind of shocking, and yet not that surprising when you start thinking about what people are sort of looking for. And this is really one of the challenges, is until you start to measure, you cannot manage it. And one of the challenges that most people are struggling is they don't know what to measure, and most of them are not measuring anything at all. And that's where you end up in this horrific scenario where people jump straight to the tools. They start counting how many people are using the tools. And people start automating things and equate it to transformation, counting activities that are happening and not business outcomes that are moving. And it's starting big, it's ignoring the evidence, and really it just has no basis for why the teams are even working on these sort of challenges. So again, one of the key questions I always ask when I meet these leaders is, how will you know you are succeeding? What is your measures of success? And it's the ultimate tell. Because if they start telling me, well, success is that we complete our AI transformation program, probably called Phoenix, that's not an answer. We do the project. Well, what project? What you need to be thinking about is defining the outcomes, right? So when I start to think about my framework, about how I help, whether it's a startup or a rapidly scaling company, right through to a Fortune 500, think about how are they describing success, I think about them really across these three major levels, right? The first one is this idea of this personal level of AI transformation that's happening to you individually, at a team, your atomic unit of change, and then the organization. Then I start using a couple of different lenses, right? When you're trying to transform the company, yes, you're looking at efficiency, but you also need to look at effectiveness. One of the things I did recently is I ran a survey for over 5,000 executives that are on my mailing lists. And when I asked the CEOs, what did they think was the most important part of AI transformation, literally 64% of them just wrote efficiency. They wanted to see cost savings and efficiency coming out of it. Now, that's great, but in this world, efficiency is sort of table stakes. It's like the minimum that you should be expecting from this. The real magic is the effectiveness, that you're changing behavior, that people are happier, healthier, working in a better way, but you're also driving better customer outcomes, and you're seeing changes in customer behavior. They're buying more, they're interacting more, they're engaging more. Then the two results to always keep your eye on is this notion of outcomes versus outputs. So again, output is often activity. It's the product of the work. So you're always interested, are we creating product? Are we shipping it? Is it going out into the world? But ultimately, you don't exist just to write features for your mobile or AI app. You exist to drive outcomes, changes in behavior that lead to customer success and business growth. And then really this idea of guardrails, which I talk about in terms of vanity and actionable metrics. So people understanding that a vanity metric is a great metric. It sounds good. You'll often hear investors talk a lot about it. So a vanity metric is we raised $10 million for our Series A round. Fantastic. But what is that a lot of money? Is that not a lot of money? Do you need $100 million to build your company? It sounds good, but there's no context. Where an actionable metric would be like, we've raised 20% of our fundraising target, that it happens to be $10 million. So it gives you much more of a relative sense, and then it will make you change your behavior. You'll take action. So we're only 20% towards our goal. We got to do more. Right. So these are some of the frameworks that I use to help people get there. But I've also, thought about different ways that, CEOs can really understand this, because it's massively important that they get their head around it. From CEOs to C-suite to VPs to yourself, is really thinking about efficiency is great, the speed and cost of things. Effectiveness is the quality and impact. Output is what we've produced. Outcome is the change. And then vanity metrics is really motion versus project. Now, once they start to understand this language, and at least how you've defined it about what success is, I also ended up creating this sort of modern sort of innovation lens, which I've not come up with a great name of FMFCB, but it's one of these things that makes me think about what's very true with technology innovations. When you bring new technologies into the world, there's a couple of aspects that are super important that are unique to technology. And it's often, are things getting faster? Are we doing them more frequently? Is it cheaper? And ultimately, is it better? And when you start to think about these notions and as how they're related to when you think about metrics for these companies, it's really important to understand if we're getting faster means, is the feedback loop faster? Are we doing things and learning more quickly? Frequently is actually how often are we going around a feedback loop? How often are we iterating the velocity of the experiments? So yes, you want to be fast, but you also want to iterate and do it frequently. And then cheaper is really the cost of experimentation. So how much does it cost us to be fast and to iterate? And then ultimately, great that you're fast, great that you iterate, great that it's relatively inexpensive to do it. But ultimately, are things getting better? Are the result of us doing this motion moving towards progress? And you'll see this pattern that showed up in agile transformations many years ago, but nobody measured these types of things. You'll see it in software, which eventually was measured by the DORA framework. So Jez Humble, Nicole Forskin, and Gene King wrote a great book called Accelerate, which was the beginnings of the DORA metrics that many people use now to manage how they build software. And this, again, was a sort of great example of starting to think about this. And we're going to see the same things in AI because ultimately it's a process of experimentation. So you're going to be thinking, how quickly can I build? How quickly am I iterating? Is it getting cheaper to do that? And am I driving better outcomes? All right, so as you know this language, then you can start to really understand metrics and where they sit in different parts of the picture. And for me, then, I create this sort of AI transformation matrix that allows people really understand what conversation are we having? Are we talking about producing something more efficiently or producing something more effectively? And that's the sort of power that you can start to get into really deep and specific questions and conversations with your teams, where you think about outputs that you're creating, outcomes being the results of what was produced, and then efficiency about how quickly and cheaply and speed you're making it, and effectiveness being actually the results of actually going through that process. So what we'll do on this session is I'm going to talk through each sort of one of these quadrants to give you a sense of some of these tools that you can use. So when you go back to your teams, you can start actually thinking, how am I going to map out these metrics that matter both for me at a personal level about AI transformation, what will matter at a team level, our atomic unit of change, and then also what's going to happen at the organizational level. But we'll be thinking about outcomes and outputs, efficiency and effectiveness, and then giving you some real metrics that you can start to think about. And then I'll pull that together all in an example from another company that I worked with, Capital One, that was in the Lean Enterprise book to give you sort of some inspiration, really about how you want to work and how you want to do this. Right. So thinking then, let's start at the personal level. So for me, one of the things I've been doing over the last 6 months is coaching executives how to get greater productivity and performance, but ultimately presence by using AI tools in their daily personal work. I've been running these programs now for the last 6 months and coaching really small individual one-on-one with executives from Fortune 500s or founders from high growth startups, a sort of 6-week program to teach them how to do this. And the results have been amazing. So what I'm going to do is share, some of the things that we think about when we're doing it. And where we started off actually was this personal productivity. So often when I ask executives, where are you seeing the most challenges, the things that are slow, that feel outdated, that take the most amount of effort? And invariably, they'll start talking to me about meetings, that meetings are this massive drag. They're a huge investment. They take a lot of time. But the point of meeting is not to meet. It's how effective are you in meeting? No. The point of meetings is to drive decisions. But you're investing a time of efficiency to show up at these meetings. And really what you want to be thinking about is, if we have these meetings and we can execute a meeting, the success is the outcome is that we make a decision. And how long it takes us to go through this iteration loop of defining what we need to do, having a meeting to discuss it, and then getting to an outcome and making a decision is actually the pattern that we want. So when I started to build this notion of AI metrics that are important for transformation, if you're going to use these tools to help you improve your decision-making velocity and speed, is really starting to think about examples like this. All right, so you have the efficiency. And one of the things we talk a lot about is minutes per decision. So when you are sitting down and you have a meeting that's happening, how long does it take to make the decision? So what we do as inputs then for this are thinking about Well, what would all the information we would need before the meeting? How would we get it? How do we capture meeting information, synthesize it, automate it, get it in the hands of people that matter? Because ultimately, the metric we care about is decision velocity and decision advantage. So, velocity is making decisions at a good rate. The advantage is making better decisions. So, when we think about output of like making decisions and outcomes, better decisions from the volume, if you will, of decisions being made, that's actually the metrics that we care about. Right. And then for me, then it starts to get into fun ways about when you what makes this faster, better, cheaper, and all the fun things that go with it, is that you start thinking about, well, what could I be doing to prepare quicker? How could I get faster drafts of meeting notes after I've been in a meeting and send them out? How can I be experimenting on a daily basis to get more people doing this? And then starting to think about the vanity and actionable metrics are much more this idea of how much time have we saved from not being in meetings? How much time have we saved in latency in making decisions? And so these are some examples at a personal level, right? And the way I sort of do this and I start is like really, really, really simple. I just get a piece of paper, I draw a line. On one side, I write before and after. And I start thinking about how long would it take us to make a certain decision? Maybe it's taken us 3 weeks. How could we get that down to 1 week? How could we get that down to 20 minutes? And thinking about what would all be the information I would need to drive that decision. That's how you get into the experiments. So you sort of see this idea of what I talk is like half the time and higher the confidence about making decisions in this world. Right. The next is sort of at the team level. And then the team is kind of interesting because it really is the atomic unit of change. It's very hard for any one individual to sort of have this massive transformational effect on a whole company. But you can by role modeling how you're working, measuring your own work and success around outcomes and outputs. But in order to get a meaningful business change, it requires a team, right? So what I start to get people thinking about when they're using these sorts of new products, when they're testing out these new AI innovations that they want to use in their company, again, the matter of speed and iteration and experimentation is the thing that we care about the most. If people are running pilots about new technologies or products that they want to build that are augmented or supported or automated with AI, you really need to be thinking about how fast are we going through that iteration cycle? How quickly are we running these experiments to understand what's working and what's not? And more importantly, changing the way we behave. Based on the outcomes of these experiments, what are we doing differently or not? So this again is a good example about what I think about for efficiency when I'm thinking about running AI pilots is I'm thinking how fast and how quickly are we creating new iterations of the product? That's the efficiency. It's from end to end, how quickly can we come up with a new iteration, build it and deploy it? That's a speed metric. The effectiveness or the outcome is really the insights that come out of that experiment. So after we've built something, we've put it out in as a pilot to test, what insights are coming back? And then how are we using that learning to inform our next decision? That's the effectiveness. Is something working? Is it not working? Should we shift it? So measuring this idea of how long it takes to create an iteration, how quickly you're getting it in people's hands is efficiency. The effectiveness then is what insights do you generate from actually what you've launched, and how does it inform changes in behavior and what you build next? And this is, again, very aligned to these even ideas that were captured in the DORA framework, where it was much more talking about how fast can we be faster at validation, more frequent at releases, cheaper at doing releases, and have better collaboration and outcomes. Right. And then, again, a great example of this where I see vanity metrics in transformations is people will talk about the number of AI prototypes that they have built, which again is them saying we're very efficient at creating a large number of prototypes. I'm like, great. So what's the effectiveness of all these prototypes that you've built? how many are working, how many are moving towards the success criteria that you've defined. If you haven't, you're just doing busy work. You're just basically doing activity and calling it transformation. And again, that is sort of, basically a waste of resources. You're only looking at efficiency. You're not looking at effectiveness. And that's sort of the last point. And then finally, there's the measure of team. And this is really where you get to the point of sort of really true transformational scale about what your business is trying to do. You've learned how to be more effective yourself in your day-to-day work. And that means running meetings better, more efficiently, and making decisions. You created the atomic unit of change where you're maybe running these AI pilots. You're launching them quickly and cheaply, and then you're learning what works and what doesn't and iterating them. But then ultimately, when you get to the organization, it really comes down to measuring the business outcomes. And these, again, are often the hardest to move. They're the biggest to have the most effect, but they're the worst place to start. So again, this is why when I'm coaching teams, I always start off at the personal level so they get to feel and understand these tools, then move on to the team level, and then ultimately we're measuring these sort of longer, slower moving metrics, which are business level. And then just to give you some examples of what I think about when I'm talking about efficiency at a corporate level, it's really about this idea of time to value, right? So from the moment you have an idea until you get it into production and in someone's hands, how long does that take? Are we talking months? Are we talking years? With these AI tools, you really need to be thinking about shorter, faster, cheaper cycles, right? The cost per success to get something end to end is your efficiency metrics. Then this effectiveness metrics are really measuring revenue from AI-based projects. So if we come up with these new pilots, we're running them, and it's actually either saving us money, making us money, avoiding cost or regulatory issues, or the time it takes us to recognize something's working and make a change, those are the real metrics of success when you're thinking about them at an organizational level. And then the examples really being this idea of faster to value, more experimentation, and better outcomes, right? And again, the thing to think about and try and avoid is would some of these exist if we didn't have AI? This is always a fun question I like to ask myself when I'm building these new pilots, especially if they're meant to be under an AI transformation. It's what would this look like if there was no technology involved in it? And what would that picture look like? So when you then start to get to an organizational level, you can really start to do some fun things, right? So examples of atomic units of change is thinking about all the different teams and understanding the value that they're delivering versus the cost it's taking them to sort of create that value, and mapping it both in terms of the magnitude of the outcomes that they're getting, and then the potential for it to be reused in the company. And these are really fascinating ways to think about visualizing this information. So what I'll do then, just to put it all together, is I'll just show you one example of how we did this when we were at Capital One. And this is a fascinating way, example that I shared, obviously, in Lean Enterprise, but also just so you see how this system works, right? So one of the first things we had to do when we worked at Capital One is I would sit down with the executive team. I would get them to describe, how will you know you've transformed? I'd ask them these questions, and they were doing some digital transformation of some description. And it was often, we'll know when we're done. But that wasn't good enough. But the interesting part is when I asked the senior executives, or when I asked people like Rich Feller, the CEO of the company, he was able to tell me, well, our customers would be interacting with us digitally more often. They'd reinvest more money back that they have with us in our current account into other products and services that we had. We'd be innovating and sharing and bringing more products to market. Now, what was great about that is he was describing outcomes, changes in behavior that would lead to a business result. And really, once we understood those changes in behavior as the outcomes, we could describe them and ask them, well, how much more? Is it 10% more, 50% more people reinvesting money with you? And then we could start to turn them into quantifiable statements. So this is an example of hypothesis-driven development, which is one of the most popular blogs on my webpage. Is like showing this idea that this is the hypothesis they wrote. We believe that Capital One investing in digital transformation will result in a stronger, faster bank. We'll know this is true when customers reinvest 30% of their wallet back in our products. There's an increase our customer portfolio by sort of 10 to 20%. We'll reduce the delivery time by 200%, right? An efficiency outcome. And then this is the one that was most fun. It was like 40% of revenues generated from products that were introduced in the last 3 years, right? Like this was fascinating, right? So when I sort of started looking at this, instantly I was like, wow, you're probably sitting there going, I can think of a bunch of experiments I could run, just even looking at this, defining success in terms of outcomes. So when you're working on your AI transformation, that's the method that I want you to do. I want you to start describing what will change in the world if you're successful launching this AI transformation or pilot transformations or even your own personal transformation. And because once you start to do that, you could map it, right? And one of the really cool things that the team at Capital One did is they were super interested about driving greater outcomes by building infrastructure and technology that would allow them to deploy new products and ideas cheaper, faster, higher volume and velocity, ultimately to resolve better customer outcomes. So they came up with this sort of little tool called the Cloudometer. And what was super fun about the Cloudometer was it basically measured a whole load of efficiency and effectiveness metrics. It looked at, how frequently were you sort of deploying new products or pilots onto cloud infrastructure, and how much cost were you reducing for running it in the cloud. So they were able to sort of create this bubble, if you will, for each team, where they understood the goal of being more frequent and delivery, as well as cheaper costs to run, and then look at what percentage of their actual work were running in cloud infrastructure. So they were sort of able to create this model that was all outcome based. And then they just started mapping the teams to see how they were doing. Now, when we did this initially, people were panicking. They were sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm on the orange team. Am I going to get fired because we're not performing as well as the purple team? But nothing could be further from the truth. No, the actual orange team was one of the most performant teams in the company because they were working on a really difficult scenario, and their relative improvement was they were sort of way down, if you will, like sort of down in this sort of lower quadrant area, and they could move it forward, which was, again, a huge step. But the idea of actually communicating true outcomes about how much cheaper were they, how often were they deploying, what percentage of their costs were they saving and operating, and were they driving great customer outcomes, really put everything into context, where most teams on transformations are just sort of reporting where our project is on time. We're building all the features that we said we would relatively efficiently because we're inside budget. 90% of our teams are now using these tools, which again is just talking about counting activities that don't really drive outcomes. So these are sort of the examples that I want you to think about when you really dive into this stuff, is how you really drive true transformation, is you've got to think about doing it in this way. So as I said, when you get started, it's one of the biggest challenges. Most people get sort of fearful about doing it, but here's my simple little playbook that I get everyone to think about. You have to start with a baseline. If you're going to transform, you've got to measure where you are and where you want to get to. So try and pick 2 or 3 sort of metrics at each level, both your personal, your team, and your organization, right? Select goals and avoid vanity metrics. Stop counting things. Think about your decisions per meeting minutes as a measure of success. Think about the amount of customer engagement that you want to drive from a new process that you've automated, and what percentage of people are going to use it, and say that their work is getting easier to do, as an example, at the team level, right? You got to think about this idea of monitoring leading and lagging metrics. Leading metrics being what are the signals that tell you people are starting to use the process, and the lagging is often the end result. So again, a leading indicator when you've automated a new system using an agent is what many people are using it and how many people come back to it. And then the lagging indicator is going to be the time that you've saved. Those are the kind of things to think about as you're building it. And then play around with this sort of embedded loops of the faster, more frequent, cheaper, and better functions that are fun to use. And then the most important thing is just keep communicating what you're doing. Talk about what's changed, what you're doing differently, and how you can get there. You know, a lot of this is really always about the sort of transformation mantras I always say is that you've got to think big, but start small and learn fast. Think big about, organizational wide AI transformation, but start small. Do something yourself, role model it, your teams do it, and then you scale fast. And swap motion for really progress metrics. Stop counting things and start looking at outcomes if they're really happening, and play around with this idea of building your own dashboard, this sort of faster, more frequent, cheaper, better type idea. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with some of the world's best companies in trying to solve and work on these problems. And it's always fun to see how everybody does it differently and learns as they go. I've also, as I said, been running an AI coaching program specifically for executives and senior leaders to help them to understand how to get more productive at the personal level. So if that's something that you're interested in, by all means, reach out, let me know. We've got a limited number of people, but it's always fun to have more people engage. Look, it's always fun to do more of these sort of sessions. I've got lots of free templates that you can log on, get access to, and potentially use by just joining or linking in with me or joining the newsletter. You know, we'll continue to keep sharing all of these lessons that we're learning, both here on the YouTube channel and on my website at barryoreilly.com. So again, always super fun to sort of do these sessions, see what people are doing, and take a couple of these questions that I'll answer in the comments. So I'll just take one here that's sort of popped up. It's kind of a big question, but love the framework. It falls within my practice around innovation accounting and organizational development. This is very heavy on the tactical and operational levels, but I think we're missing a lot of discussion around AI and implementation and transformation. Where does this fail in your strategic discussions with organizations? So great question. And again, one of the reasons I think I'd argue it's not necessarily that it's failing, it's finding the right people to have the right conversations with. So one of the reasons I've chosen to always pick the individual level, the team level, and the organizational level is because you're looking at different, if you will, actors that move at different paces, have different concerns and things that matter to them. So execs are generally thinking at the organizational level. They're thinking about big indicators like revenue, efficiency, cost savings. So trying to speak to them about personal productivity is interesting, but you've got to work your way back to helping them understand if the company's going to change, that means our teams need to change, and that means you need to change. So showing sort of one of the hacks I've always used with great success, and then helping them understand this picture, as I said, of efficiency versus effectiveness. Can we do things quickly at pace? Effectiveness, if we do things quickly at pace, does it drive an impact that we want? And if it does, what are we doing differently to improve? Right? Just very simple things that get them thinking, yeah, I need to be fast. I need to be cheap. I need to actually have a positive impact and know the direction I'm trying to go in. And then I've got to adapt. And really, that's where a lot of the sort of faster, more frequent, cheaper, better conversation came up from, because it's getting people thinking about those things when they're trying to come up with ways to measure. All right, and one more question then. Do you think AI is fundamentally different? Same with comes to organizational transformation, including cloud, DevOps, and big data. Look, all of these changes had huge effects, if you will, in terms of massive cost savings, greater efficiency for sure. in terms of our ability to frequently ship, right? Cloud computing made it much cheaper for companies to build, ship, and iterate software. But still, people don't measure outcomes of customer behavior. Like, it's one of the funniest things I keep finding is that these tools make things really efficient, but nobody's asking, is the thing we're building being effective? It's still sort of a lost art. So I think that is one thing that still needs to improve regardless of the technology. What is, for me, fundamentally unique about these AI, Gen AI, machine learning, all these tools, is that you're really putting the power into people's hands. So as an executive, as I say, I coach a lot of them. Now they can sit down with tools whether it's Copilot in the Microsoft stack, or maybe they're using AI tools from OpenAI, and they can pull together disparate data sources as inputs into a small database that they want to build for themselves. And then they can write prompts to sort of experiment with strategies and test scenarios and challenge their thinking. And this would have taken months to do before at a personal level. They would have had to ask people, can you get me access to that data? How long will it take? Is that the right thing? Here's a half-baked idea I have. Does it work or not? So for me, that's one of the huge personal transformations that's happening with this technology. And then seeing that propagate into the team and beyond is something, again, even more unique. Okay, so again, thank you very much, everybody, for sort of joining. It's always been fun. If you want to keep in touch, again, go to barryoreilly.com, or you can email us. It's been super fun sharing, some of our lessons learned. And by all means, make sure you share this with somebody if you think it was good. Don't forget to subscribe or put some thoughts in the comments. Thank you very much, and we'll speak to you soon.